My wife cheated because I worked too much. I chose self-respect and walked away. The promotion that felt like a funeral. I used to think success had a sound. I imagined champagne corks, applause, maybe a dramatic song that plays when you walk into a room. Turns out success mostly sounds like a phone vibrating at 5 a.m. and a coffee machine begging for mercy. 5 years earlier, I was the guy who carried folding chairs for other people's events. The guy who said yes to everything because no one had ever said yes to me. My wife Lena loved that version of me. She said I was hungry, ambitious, unstoppable. She said it like it was cute, like a puppy that still had big paws and no idea how large it would grow. We dated 2 years, married after that. The wedding was small, the kind where everyone hugs you like they are handing you a blessing and a warning at the same time. Lena cried happy tears. I remember because my sleeve smelled like her mascara. The first 3 years of marriage were a grind, but it was our grind. We ate cheap takeout on the couch and made plans we could not afford yet. I promised her I would build something real. She promised she would be there when it happened. We said those promises like they were simple, like you could just say them and they would stay true forever. Then my business took off. Not overnight, not with fireworks, but with a slow, terrifying climb. One contract became 3, 3 became 10, and suddenly I had employees calling me sir, which is funny because I still had student loan brain and ketchup packet budgeting in my soul. By year 5, I had what people call a name. I had acquaintances in every corner of the city. I had meetings that started with smiles and ended with signatures. I also had a calendar that looked like a game of Tetris designed by someone who hated peace. I told myself it was for Lena, for us, for the future kids we had not even agreed on yet. I told myself love could handle a busy season. I told myself a lot of things that sounded noble and responsible, which is how you can lie to yourself while still feeling like a good person. At first, Lena enjoyed the upgrade. Dinners in places where the chairs were too heavy to move. Vacations where the towels were folded into animals that stared at you like they knew your secrets. She posted pictures of my suit jacket on the back of a chair like it was a celebrity sighting. But in the last few months, something changed. Not loud, not obvious. More like the temperature in a room dropping 1 degree at a time until you realize you are freezing. She started talking to me like I was a coworker who forgot to refill the printer paper. Her tone got short. Her eyes got distant. She stopped asking how my day was and started telling me what I did wrong before I even took my shoes off. One night, I walked into the kitchen and said, "Hey, we need to talk." I kept my voice calm like I was handling a client, because apparently I had learned to negotiate with everyone except my own wife. She did not look up from her phone. She said, "About what?" I said, "About us. You have been cold lately. Did I do something? Are you okay?" She sighed like I had asked her to explain math to a lamp. She said, "You are always making everything so dramatic." I laughed a little because it was either that or throw my head into the countertop. I said, "Dramatic is not what I am going for. I am going for married." She finally looked at me then. Her eyes were sharp, almost annoyed. She said, "You want married? Try being here." I said, "I am here right now." She said, "Physically, sure. Mentally, you have been married to your phone." I wanted to say that phone was paying for the roof over our heads, but I swallowed it because I still believed this was fixable. I stepped closer, softer now. I said, "Okay, tell me what you need. Tell me what I am missing." Lena put her phone down like she was doing me a favor. She said, "I need a husband who notices me without me having to beg for it." I said, "I notice you. I always notice you." She gave a small laugh that did not sound happy. She said, "You notice me like you notice furniture. You walk past and assume it will always be there." That line hit harder than any insult because it came dressed as wisdom. And I hate to admit it, but part of me wondered if she was right. Not because I did not love her, I did, but love can get buried under deadlines if you let it. And I had been letting a lot of things slide. So I made a plan, a simple plan. I would take a weekend off, no calls, no meetings, just us. I even texted my assistant the next morning and told her to block my calendar. She replied with 3 question marks like, I had requested to cancel gravity. That Friday, I came home early with flowers. I know, flowers are basic. But basic is underrated when your marriage feels like it is buffering. I walked in and the house was quiet, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Lena was in the bedroom. I could hear her voice, soft and low. She was on a call. I did not want to eavesdrop. But then I heard my name, and I froze. She said, I know. He is trying now. It was not what she said that stopped me. It was the way she said it, like I was a task, like I was weather, something happening around her, not with her. I backed away and went to the kitchen, set the flowers down on the counter like they were evidence. Then Lena walked in a minute later. She smiled too fast, she said. "Oh, you were home early," I said. "Surprise, weekend getaway. Just us." She blinked. "Just once." Then she said, "I have plans," I said. "Plans," she said. "Yes, with friends." I said, "Cancel them." She looked at me like I had forgotten my place. She said, "You cannot just schedule me like one of your meetings." That stung, but I kept calm. I said, "Lena, I am trying. I am here. I'm choosing us." She shrugged, actually shrugged, and said, "You are choosing us now because you are scared I am pulling away." I said, "I am choosing us because you are my wife." She picked up the flowers, turned them in her hands, then set them back down like they were too heavy. She said, "You do not get a medal for basic husband behavior." Then she walked out to get ready, leaving me in the kitchen staring at a bouquet that suddenly looked like an apology I did not understand. That night she left wearing a dress I had not seen in months. Perfume too. Not her everyday perfume. The one she wore to weddings and special nights. She kissed my cheek like I was her cousin and said, "Do not wait up." I stood by the window after she drove away, telling myself not to be paranoid, telling myself not to become the kind of man who checks phones and counts minutes. I told myself trust is part of love. I told myself everything, and still my stomach felt like it had swallowed a stone. I did not know then that this was the beginning of the month that would split my life into before and after. I just knew I was standing in a nice house I paid for, feeling weirdly alone, and the silence sounded a lot like success. The friend who hesitated too long. The month after that night moved strangely, fast on the calendar but slow in my chest. Lena came and went like a guest who knew the code to the door. She was polite, distant, efficient. She spoke in updates instead of conversations. I tried again. Dinners planned in advance, mornings without my phone, listening more than talking, but effort only works when it lands somewhere. Mine kept falling into empty space. One evening I was at my office late, the city outside my window glowing like it was celebrating something without me. When my friend Mark stopped by, Mark had been around since before the money, before the suits. He knew the version of me that worried about gas prices more than profit margins. He stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes not meeting mine. I joked, "What is this, an intervention or a surprise party?" He did not laugh. He said, "Do you have a minute?" I said, "For you." "Always." He sat down slowly like gravity was heavier on him than usual. He said, "I do not know how to say this without sounding like a bad movie." I said, "Try anyway. I have had a long week." He took a breath, then another, then said, "I saw Lena last weekend." I said, "Okay." He said, "She was not alone." I felt my spine straighten. I said, "Not alone how?" Mark rubbed his face, said, "With a guy." I said, "A friend?" He shook his head. "No, not a friend." They were close, too close, hands, laughing, the kind of body language you do not misread unless you want to lie to yourself. I laughed then, an ugly sound. I said, "Mark, you are tired. You probably saw something and filled in the blanks." He looked at me like I had just stepped in front of a moving car. He said, "I hoped you would say that." I hoped I was wrong. I did not say anything, because silence suddenly felt safer than words. He added quietly, "I waited a week before telling you. I am sorry. I did not know what to do." That week explained everything. The coldness, the perfume, the plans, the way she kissed my cheek like it was a formality. I thanked him, because what else do you say to someone handing you the truth wrapped in guilt? After he left, I sat alone in my office, lights off, city still glowing, and I realized something strange. I was not angry yet. I was hollow, like someone had reached into my life and removed a load-bearing wall, and the structure was still standing, just confused about why it felt unstable. I drove home slower than usual, not because of traffic, but because I was not sure what version of my life was waiting for me. Lena was there, sitting on the couch scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. That smile again. Quick, practiced. I sat across from her, not next to her, and said, "We need to talk." She sighed. "Here we go," I said. "Mark saw you." She froze, just for half a second. But it was enough. She said, "Saw me doing what?" I said, "With him." She put the phone down slowly, then crossed her arms, and instead of denial, instead of shock, she said, "So he told you." That was the moment something in me went quiet. No shouting, no drama, just clarity. I said, "How long?" She said, "Does it matter?" I said, "Yes." She shrugged. "A few months," I said. "While I was working," she said. "While you were ignoring me." There it was. The justification served like a conclusion. she said. You were never around. You chose work over me. I needed attention, I said. I was building a life for us. She laughed softly. Bitter, she said. You were building a life you liked. I was just living in it. I stood up, calm, almost curious. I said, so cheating was your solution, she said. Do not make it sound like that. I said, like what? Accurate. She stood too, voice rising. I would not have looked elsewhere if you had been a husband. I said, you could have talked to me, she said. I tried. I said, you tried sarcasm and silence. That is not communication. She crossed her arms tighter, said, you are not innocent here. I nodded, said, maybe not. But I am honest. She stared at me like she expected tears or rage. I gave her neither. I said, I need some air. I grabbed my keys. She called after me. Where are you going? I turned back once, said, somewhere I can think without being blamed for your choices. That night I slept in a hotel, staring at the ceiling, replaying 5 years like a highlight reel with bad editing. I felt devastated, yes, but also insulted, because the story she told herself required me to be small, inattentive, negligent, and I knew who I was. I knew what I had built, and I knew this was not going to end with me apologizing for someone else's betrayal. That was the night I stopped trying to save the marriage and started protecting myself, the calm before the legal storm. The next morning I woke up clearer than I expected, not healed, not fine, but focused. Heartbreak is loud at first, but then it gets quiet, and that silence can either destroy you or sharpen you. I chose sharp. I did not go home right away. Instead, I went to my office, showered in the private bathroom, changed into a suit, and looked at myself in the mirror longer than usual, not to admire, but to remind myself who I was before I was someone's husband. I was not a man who begged to be chosen. I was a man who built things. That afternoon I called a lawyer, not angrily, not impulsively, calmly, like I was scheduling a meeting about expansion. He was recommended by someone who had lost more than a marriage and still walked straight. When we met, he listened without interrupting, then asked one question that told me everything. He said, do you want revenge or resolution? I said, I want fairness and distance. He nodded, said, then do exactly what I tell you and nothing else. That night, I went home. Lena was there, sitting at the kitchen table like she had been waiting for a verdict. She looked tired, nervous. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, she said. Where did you go? I said, I needed space. She said, I was worried. I said, I believe that you were uncomfortable, not worried. She flinched, then said, are you going to tell me what you were thinking? I said, I am thinking that this house feels smaller than it did a week ago. She said, I told you why it happened. You were not there. I said, and yet you never left. You stayed. You smiled. You planned dinners. You chose to lie every day. Instead of telling the truth once, she raised her voice. I did not cheat to hurt you. I said, intentions do not erase actions. She looked at me like she was searching for the version of me that would soften. She said, what are you going to do? I said, I am going to protect what I built. She said, built alone apparently. I smiled, not happily, but knowingly. I said, no, built while trusting the wrong person. There was a pause. Then she said quietly, I made a mistake. I said, mistakes are accidents. This was a pattern. She reached for my hand. I stepped back, not dramatically, just enough, and that movement changed the room. She said, you are being cold. I said, no, I am being clear. She asked, are you filing for divorce? I said, yes. She inhaled sharply like the word hit her physically. Then she said, so that is it. 5 years and you just walk away? I said, I did not walk away. You opened the door and invited someone else in. I am just refusing to live in the hallway. She cried then, quietly, not performative, and for a moment I hated that I still knew her tells, but clarity held. I slept in the guest room that night, locked, not because I was afraid, but because boundaries matter most when emotions try to negotiate. Over the next weeks, I followed my lawyer's instructions like a checklist. Finances separated, accounts reviewed, documents copied, conversations limited. Lena shifted strategies, some days angry, some days nostalgic, some days apologetic. She reminded me of our early years, the takeout nights, the promises. I listened politely, but I did not engage, because memories are not currency. You cannot pay future trust with past affection. One evening she said, you are acting like I mean nothing to you. I said, no, I am acting like what you did matters. She said, you are punishing me. I said, consequences are not punishment, they are outcomes. That sentence ended the argument, not because it was clever, but because it was true. And in that truth, I felt something unexpected, strength, quiet, steady, the kind that does not need to prove anything. I was not winning yet, but I was no longer losing myself. And that was the turning point. When love turns into negotiation, the divorce process did not feel like a battle. It felt like a slow audit of my life. Every decision examined, every signature weighted. And through it all, Lena kept changing tactics like she was testing which version of herself might still work on me. One morning she was calm and reasonable, talking about fair division and mutual respect. The next she was emotional, reminding me how much she had supported me before the money, before the long hours, before the name. I listened because listening costs nothing, but agreement was off the table. She said, "I stood by you when you had nothing." I said, "And I am grateful for that. But gratitude does not mean obligation to accept betrayal." She frowned, said, "You would not even have this life without me." I said, "You were part of my journey, not the engine." That line landed heavier than I expected, not because it was cruel, but because it was honest. The lawyer warned me this would happen. When people lose control, they try to rewrite history. Lena started saying things like, "We grew apart. We both made mistakes. It just happened." I corrected her once, calmly. I said, "We did not grow apart. You stepped out. Do not blur the difference." She accused me of being heartless, said I was choosing money over forgiveness. I almost laughed at that, because I had spent years choosing responsibility over comfort. I said, "I am choosing self-respect over pretending nothing happened." One evening, she tried a different angle. She cooked dinner, my favorite from when we were dating. The smell alone pulled at something old and soft in me. We ate in silence. Then she said, "Maybe we can start over. Leave all this behind." I looked at her and realized how strange it was to sit across from someone you once trusted completely and feel absolutely finished. I said, "Starting over requires two people who protected the relationship." She said, "I made one mistake." I said, "You made many. You just regret the outcome now." She reached across the table, tears forming, said, "I still love you." I said, "Love that survives only when it is convenient is not love I can build with." That ended dinner. After that, she grew desperate, texts late at night, memories sent like evidence, apologies layered with excuses. I did not block her. I simply did not respond. Silence is not cruelty. It is clarity without commentary. Behind the scenes, the legal work progressed, timelines established, financial separation tightened. I learned just how much of what I built was protected by documentation and foresight. Success is not just earning money. It is knowing how to defend what you earned. Lena started realizing the reality, not the imagined version where guilt would save her. She confronted me one afternoon, eyes red, voice shaking, said, "Are you really going to leave me with nothing?" I corrected her gently. I said, "I am leaving you with exactly what you contributed to the marriage contract as it stands. No more, no less." She said, "That is cruel." I said, "No. Cruel is rewriting loyalty as neglect to justify betrayal." That was the moment her anger broke into fear, and I understood something important. She was not afraid of losing me. She was afraid of losing access to the life I provided, and that realization freed me more than any legal document, because it confirmed that walking away was not just necessary, it was right. I stopped seeing her as my wife and started seeing her as someone facing the consequences of her own decisions, and that shift made everything simpler. The house felt quieter, cleaner somehow, not because she spoke less, but because I was no longer carrying the weight of trying to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding me. The process was not over yet, but the power dynamic had changed. And for the first time since the truth came out, I slept through the night without waking up heavy. I was not healed, but I was aligned. And alignment is where real recovery begins, the begging phase. By the time the papers were nearly finalized, Lena stopped pretending and started pleading. It was not subtle anymore, not strategic. It was raw and messy and a little late. She showed up at my office unannounced one afternoon, no makeup, eyes tired, wearing the hoodie I used to steal from her on lazy Sundays. The symbolism was not lost on me. She said, "Please just talk to me." I said, "This is not the place." She said, "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. People forgive worse things." I looked at her and realized how calm I felt. Not cold, just done. I said, "Forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation." She stepped closer, said, "I will do anything, counseling, rules, transparency. I will quit my job. I will change." I said, "You already changed, just not in the direction you expected." She cried then. Openly. Said, I felt invisible. I said, feeling unseen does not justify becoming unfaithful. It just explains why you chose the easy exit instead of the honest conversation. She accused me of punishing her to feel powerful. I shook my head, said, no. I am walking away because I respect myself too much to stay where loyalty is optional. She asked, what about love? I answered honestly, love without trust is just memory, and I cannot live in the past. She reached for me one last time. I stepped back, same as before, and that distance said everything words no longer could. Security escorted her out gently, professionally, and I stood there feeling strangely light, not victorious, not proud, just free, because begging does not restore what was broken. It only confirms that it is. And as the elevator doors closed behind her, I knew this chapter was ending whether she accepted it or not. And for the first time since it all began, I did not feel devastated. I felt resolved. After the silence, the divorce finalized quietly. No dramatic courtroom scene, no speeches, just signatures and the soft click of a pen closing a chapter. Lena did not show up, her lawyer did. Efficient and detached, which felt appropriate. I walked out of that building lighter than I walked in, not because I had won something, but because I had stopped carrying something that was never meant to be mine alone. Friends asked how I was doing. I told them the truth. I am good in a new way, not the loud kind, the stable kind. I moved houses, not far, just far enough that every room did not echo with old arguments. The new place was smaller, cleaner, intentionally simple. I kept what mattered and let the rest go. Success had taught me how to accumulate. This taught me how to edit. Work stayed busy, but I set boundaries I used to ignore. Dinners without emails, weekends without meetings, not because someone demanded it, but because I wanted it. Ironically, I was more productive than ever. Focus does that. Sometimes Lena crossed my mind, not with anger, not even sadness. More like a lesson you do not need to relearn. She sent one last message months later, just 2 words, I am sorry. I did not reply, not out of spite, but because closure does not always require response. The silence held, and it was peaceful. I started running again, reading books I had abandoned, laughing more easily. Trust came back slowly, not in others, but in myself. I had proven something important, that I could lose a marriage and still keep my identity intact, still stand straight, still choose dignity over bitterness. Looking back, I see it clearly now. She did not cheat because I worked too much. She cheated because she wanted something without earning it, attention without accountability, excitement without responsibility. And I did not leave because I stopped loving her. I left because I finally loved myself enough. That realization did not make me lonely. It made me solid. And in that solidity, I built a life that did not require excuses, explanations, or apologies for existing. Just clarity, peace, and forward motion, the quiet win. People think the ending of a story like this should be loud, a new romance, a public success, some moment where the past watches you thrive and regrets everything. But real victory is quieter than that. Real victory is waking up without resentment. I did not rebuild my life to prove anything to Lena. I rebuilt it because peace turned out to be addictive. I stopped explaining myself to people who already made up their minds. I stopped apologizing for ambition. I stopped confusing sacrifice with love. The business kept growing, not wildly, but steadily, the way strong things do. I chose partners carefully now, in work and in life. Attention without loyalty stopped impressing me. Charm without integrity lost its shine. I learned that attraction fades, but character does not. Sometimes I run into Lena through mutual circles, brief moments, polite distance. She looks at me like she wants to say something meaningful, and then remembers she already said everything that mattered when it counted least. I do not hate her. Hate is heavy, and I travel light these days. I wish her well in the way you wish a stranger well, sincerely but without attachment. Looking back, I understand the real lesson was never about betrayal. It was about alignment. I outgrew a version of my life, and instead of adjusting, she escaped. I faced it. That difference changed everything. I am not the man I was when I carried folding chairs and dreamed quietly. And I am not the man who stood in a kitchen holding flowers while his marriage slipped away. I am better, not perfect, but honest, calm, grounded. And that is the ending no one warns you about, the one where you do not get revenge, you get clarity. You do not get her back, you get yourself back. And that turns out to be more than enough.